Greetings and salutations, fellow gamers. It is I, the Dungeon Master, here once again to answer your questions and help guide you on the path to becoming the best Dungeon Master you can be. Today, we're going to be answering a question from Nelson Whitney. He asks, looking for good ideas. Mostly I just need some good ideas of ancient ruins I can put in a kingdom where my campaign will be taking place. Most of the kingdom is fields, Great Plain-like. In the past, though, lots of warring kingdoms have fought over the land because it is extremely fertile. What kind of ancient ruins can I put in this setting? Also, what monsters would be good to put in them as well? Thanks in advance. Now, normally we wouldn't tackle these kinds of specific, what do I put in my campaign kinds of questions, because those are all going to be, the same answer of, well, what kind of campaign are you running, and then breaking it down specifically for them. And well, there might be a lot of other DMs out there who want to run a similar sort of campaign and can glean ideas off of that. We want to stay a little more broad stroke where we tackle questions that all DMs have and could use an answer to. But this is a perfect opportunity to discuss world building. And what I mean by that is your world is more than just one map that you draw or commission, and then that is the totality of the world. You draw a couple border lines on a copy of it, maybe, indicate which kingdoms are where. But you have to understand that not only have the borders probably been fluid throughout the centuries or millennia that your world has existed, but that the terrain itself changes over time. Now, that takes a long time, of course, but depending on how long your kingdom, your world, I should say, has been around, the terrain can have changed dramatically, rising and lowering water tables, droughts, floods, glaciers, all kinds of things can affect the terrain in massive ways, including continental shift, which can create valleys and mountains in, just a few thousand years when they start colliding. And so, you want to consider all of these factors when you're deciding what exactly to include and not include in your world. For example, a common theme that a lot of Dungeons and Dragons and other RPGs follow is that elves and dwarves were some of the first races, and that they existed long before men climbed out of their caves and began building cities and challenging them for supremacy of the world, which is kind of the default setting of most Dungeons and Dragons and RPGs, is that men kind of control the world and elves and dwarves have been relegated to their islands and mountains and forests, etc. But before that, they ruled the world, basically. They were free to spread far and wide. Perhaps monsters, dragons, titans and gods of old kept them constrained to a certain point, but they certainly were more free to build cities and fortresses, castles, temples, roads, you name it, all over the map before there was the other humanoids that came and started to claim their piece of the pie as well. So, you want to consider that some of your most ancient ruins are possibly going to be elven and dwarven and located in places that you wouldn't necessarily expect, perhaps even underneath existing human cities that were built on top of the ruins or incorporated the ruins into their building. Another factor to consider is that some of these ruins are not necessarily ruins because they were taken over or destroyed, but they could have experienced um, challenges that forced people to leave, extreme drought or something like that. So you might have an entirely intact castle or city that was just simply abandoned. Sure, it might be a little worse for wear, but it's not like it was bombarded with siege and burned to the ground by enemy soldiers. Another factor to consider would be changing weather that possibly flooded a coastal city. And so now, if you dive down off the coast of X kingdom, you can find an entire city sunken beneath the waters. Perhaps it's been taken over by underwater creatures or humanoids of some kind. That's really something for each DM to decide for themselves. Certainly, there would be coral and seaweed growth and things like that to consider, but overall, the city itself might be very much the way you would have found it on the day that it sunk. Wares still sitting in their baskets and carts, waiting to be shipped to the marketplace. People still trapped in their houses that were unable to escape the waters. Just things like that you can add a lot of history to your world by considering exactly what kinds of ruins and dungeons you want to include in your world. Just a little tangential, but one thing to consider is, if you wanted a series of tunnels underneath the main land, boulets and purple worms and things like that spring to mind. But then consider, when did they start building these tunnels? Are they still building them? What sorts of events have occurred because of this massive network of purple worm and boulet tunnels that have been dug throughout your world? Have cities collapsed underneath the tunnels and now they're located deep underground? Are these tunnels inhabited by other creatures, more powerful than the boulets and purple worms that dug them? Is it a beholder's dream palace now that they have this huge tunneled network? Are there dragons living in there? Have they flooded and become home to crocodiles and other creatures like that? Just things of that nature are going to help you make a richer, more living world when you start to consider how everything has interacted with each other and what sorts of events have transpired because of that. Are there a lot of elven and dwarven ruins near the mountains where potentially the elves launched attacks and the dwarves launched counterattacks against their enemy of old? It's one of those questions that will help you decide exactly how the history of your world played out, give you a much fuller world for your players to enjoy, and it's just really going to give you that next level of DMing confidence and skill when you can say, okay, well, this is how things have gone in my world so far, and this is how I see things going from here. And then when your players throw curveballs at you, because they will, you can be better prepared to say, okay, well, this is what I'm going to have happen as a result of that, based off of other things that you've already predetermined. So, a great question, and I'd like to specifically answer him, just as somebody who lives near the Great Lakes and all of that. That if you want to incorporate some ancient ruins, consider having some of them be buried deep within a forest where that's kind of overgrown them. That's something that we have a lot of around here. And consider having some of them sunk to the bottom of lakes, rivers. Perhaps the river didn't even completely sink it. Perhaps half of the city sticks up out of a huge river that, its path was diverted into the town one day. Consider interesting terrain and having something more than just, okay, you come across the ruins of blank, you see crumbled buildings and roads that are in desperate need of repair, all over the place. Plants have begun overgrowing. That's all good and fine to have a couple of those out on the plains as well. But consider that the plains might have once been an ocean, and buried beneath the layers of dirt and rock might be an entire city. You can have access through caves and things like that, or perhaps there's some sort of magical portal that still, can transport them, but upon being teleported there, they discover that the entire thing is in an underground lake and flooded, or just simply in an underground cavern and there's, precious little oxygen left. Just things like that are going to not only give you more interesting places for your players to go, but it's going to give you world building acumen to decide, how did this city get underground? And once you start deciding those factors, now you're beginning to add layer upon layer to your world that is only going to enrich it, enrich your player's experience, and give you more and more confidence to continue building this world. And if you get long in the tooth like me, you can have a world that you've been working on for 20 plus years, and it really starts to become a living, breathing world when you've been able to add that much detail to it. So yeah, as always, good gaming, everyone, and I'll see you next time.